In this episode, we're going to cover a period of Indian history that's commonly called the Vedic Age. It's arguably one of the most influential, if not the most influential, period of Indian history, especially with regard to religion and philosophy. Historians called the period of India's history between 1500 to 500 BCE the Vedic Age because our knowledge of it comes mostly from the Vedas. So, what are the Vedas? To put it simply, they are 4 collections of the most sacred knowledge in the Hindu tradition. The name of these 4 Vedas are the Rig Veda, the Yajur Veda, the Sama Veda, and the Arthava Veda. The word Veda comes from the Sanskrit word vid, meaning to know. The Rig Veda is the oldest of the 4. Most historians and linguists date the Rig Veda to between the years 3000 to 1500 BCE. However, it's very difficult to really know the precise date of the Vedas because they were transmitted orally for countless generations until they were finally written down sometime in the 4th or 5th century BCE. Most of the hymns in the Rig Veda are addressed to natural powers, which are personified as various deities, though ultimately, they are all part of the one supreme being, i.e., God. The second Veda, known as the Yajur Veda, deals predominantly with how to perform various rituals and chants called mantras, along with some religious commentary. The third Veda, known as the Sama Veda, contains a collection of verses mostly taken from the Rig Veda, but that are arranged in a poetic form that can be sung. The fourth and most recent Veda, the Arthava Veda, is believed to have been compiled at a date significantly after the first 3. It contains mostly prayers or mantras that deal with preventing sickness and keeping away evil spirits. Some also include 2 other sacred bodies of knowledge as Vedas, specifically the Danu, which deals with weapons, and the Ayur, which deals with medicine. So, one thing I can tell you is that the historical origin of the Vedas is currently a controversial topic with many people. There are several theories with regard to this, but 2 main ones that predominate the discussion. The first of these, which is the older and more well-established theory, has to do with a group of mostly nomadic, horseback-riding Indo-European speakers called Aryans. It essentially states that the Aryans were nomads who originated on the steppes of Eurasia and gradually migrated to the Indus Valley before spreading throughout the Indian subcontinent and becoming the dominant culture there. It's they who compiled the Vedas in their native language of Sanskrit, which is related to other Indo-European languages such as Greek, Latin, as well as the Germanic and Iranian languages. The Aryan migration theory became very popular and the definitive one for European scholars, especially the British. Many Indians also believe in this theory, as there is a lot of other evidence to also support it. The second theory, which is popular among some Indian scholars, is that the Aryans and the Vedas, as well as other aspects of Indian culture that we're familiar with, are totally indigenous to the Indian subcontinent. This is called the Out of India theory, and its proponents believe that instead of the Aryans migrating to India, they migrated outside of India to places like Central Asia, with the Sanskrit language being, if not the source, then a great influence on the other Indo-European languages. They see the great Harappan cities and other parts of the subcontinent as being the foundations of Indian and Hindu civilization. Now, there are several other theories, but they're beyond the scope of this video. Unlike the Harappan society that preceded it, the early civilization of the Vedic Aryans was not an urban one. In fact, it was just the opposite. The Aryan tribes were mostly, if not all, nomadic, or at least semi-nomadic. They didn't have brick or stone houses, intricate pottery, or massive sculptures. Their shelters were made of wood, bamboo, and mud. They also didn't have any form of writing. Their language, Sanskrit, first appeared in written form centuries after the Vedas were composed. The Aryans excelled at several things that gave them an advantage over the other peoples of the region, specifically the use of iron weapons and horseback or chariot riding, which made them swift and skilled warriors and allowed them to dominate their enemies, which in the Vedas are called dasas. These are believed to have been the settled peoples of the Indus Valley and surrounding regions who are said to have lived in forts. Though considered to be mostly religious in nature, the Vedas give us a window into what life was like for the early Aryan peoples of India. So initially, Vedic society was a tribal one in which most people lived a semi-nomadic life. The term for tribe was jana. Each jana had a chief known as a raja. While the word raja would later on mean king, in those early days it meant the ruler of a tribe. The raja was often known as the Gopati, meaning protector of cattle. In Vedic society, this position was of extreme importance because cattle was the main source of wealth. In fact, a wealthy person was called a gomat, which roughly can be translated as rich in cattle. The Rig Veda also states specifically that cows are not to be killed. The Raja or Gopati's position was not hereditary. He was appointed by the elder or influential men of the jana. Other members of the jana had occupations that were also not necessarily based on their birth. There's a beautiful verse in the Vedas that states, "I am a poet, my father is a physician, and my mother grinds grain upon the stone. Striving for wealth, with varied plans, we follow our desires like cattle." This brings us to the often misunderstood topic of divisions or caste in Indian society. Actually, caste is derived from the Portuguese word castas, which was first used by the Portuguese explorers and traders when they came to India over 500 years ago. The Sanskrit word is Varna, which loosely translates to the word color in English. While one's Varna later on may have become a sort of life sentence that restricted individuals to certain occupations and forbid them from intermixing with those of other Varnas, during the early Vedic Age, it simply denoted or classified a person according to the role that they played in society. The first group were the Brahmins, who were the most respected and learned group in Vedic society. It was their duty to preserve the sacred knowledge of the Vedas and perform the proper rituals and sacrifices. The second Varna consisted of the Kshatriyas. This was the group that clan leaders and warriors, whose duty it was to protect the jana, belonged to. The third Varna were the Vaishyas, who were in a sense the middle class of Vedic society. It's in this group that you'd have your merchants, shopkeepers, artisans, bakers, etc. The fourth and final Varna consisted of the Shudras, which was made up of mostly peasants and those who did menial tasks. Though the Varna system structured society in a hierarchical fashion, it didn't necessarily mean that one person was spiritually lower than another. Salvation after death was still open to all people based on their righteous conduct. Of course, it'd be misleading to imply that Vedic society was egalitarian, because in practice, it wasn't. Politically, socially, and economically, the Brahmins and Kshatriyas were higher up on the totem pole, or social pyramid, than the Vaishyas and Shudras. In contrast to the many beautiful temples that dot India's landscape today, during the Vedic period, there are few, if any, records or even evidence of temples. Worship was done out in the open, with rituals often involving the use of fire. Of all of the deities mentioned in the Rig Veda, Indra was considered to be the most powerful, with something like 250 hymns dedicated to him. In the Vedas, he is sometimes addressed as Purandhar, meaning breaker of forts, and also as Maghavan, meaning the bounteous. Other popular deities mentioned in the Vedas include Agni, who is associated with fire, and Varuna, who is associated with water. There are also many hymns dedicated to deities such as Yama, Soma, Rudra, Pushan, Surya, and several others. During what's commonly referred to as the later Vedic period, the various Aryan tribes began to settle down and create permanent settlements in the form of small kingdoms. Thus, instead of fighting over cattle, wars were fought over territory, with the rajas no longer being elected by other members of their tribe, or jana. They became kings and founded their own dynasties. Settlements gradually turned into cities, and a new urban culture with distinct forms of art, pottery, and greater use of iron arose. Essentially, society was transforming from the semi-nomadic lifestyle of their ancestors into a sedentary one of little petty kingdoms and states. We'll take a look at some of these kingdoms in future episodes. As always, thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. And if you learned something, please hit that like button and subscribe. Take care, and I'll catch you in the next episode.